flaming cat army that terrified the world. Imagine your city is under siege. You've barred the gates, manned the walls, and you're ready for a long, bloody fight. But the main attack doesn't come from soldiers. It comes from your own pets, turned into living torches, streaking through your streets and setting your entire world on fire. This isn't a scene from a horror movie. This is the story of one of the most twisted mind games in the history of warfare, a tactic so terrifying it could shatter an enemy's will to fight before a single sword was drawn. It's a tale attributed to the master of psychological warfare himself, Genghis Khan. But did it really happen? Today, we're separating the man from the myth to uncover the brutal truth behind the legend of the Flaming Cat Army. All right, before we get into one of history's strangest and most brutal stories, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. We explore the wildest corners of the past every week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. The legend of the unconquerable city. The story supposedly takes place in the early 13th century, as the Mongols were sweeping through the Tangut kingdom of Western Xia. Genghis Khan, the uniter of the Mongol tribes, an architect of a terrifyingly fast-growing empire, had his sights set on this kingdom. But one fortress city, known in the legends as Volahigh, refused to bend the knee. Volahigh was a serious problem. Its walls were high, its soldiers were stubborn, and the Mongol army, who were masters of open field battle, just couldn't crack it. Their usual siege tactics were failing. They'd built stockades, hammered the city with siege engines, and even launched the corpses of the dead over the walls to spread disease and terror, all standard if gruesome stuff from the Mongol playbook. But still, Volahigh would not fall. The siege was costing the Mongols time, resources, and men. Frustrated, Genghis Khan seemed to change his strategy completely. He couldn't take the city by force, so he'd try diplomacy. He sent a message to the city's defending general, and it was a weird one. He announced he would lift the siege and ride away. All he wanted in return was a gift. Not gold, not silk, not weapons. He wanted 1,000 cats and 10,000 swallows. You heard that right. The commander inside Volahigh was, as you can imagine, completely baffled. 1,000 cats and 10,000 birds? It was such a bizarre, almost laughable request. Was this a trick? Or had the great Khan finally lost his mind out there in the dust? Believing it was a sign that the Mongols were tired and ready to quit, the commander agreed. He ordered the citizens to round up the animals. The city's defenders, relieved and probably making a few jokes, gathered the creatures and sent them out to the Mongol camp. They thought the war was over. They couldn't have been more wrong. An inferno from the sky. Once the animals arrived at the Mongol camp, Genghis Khan's true, horrifying plan was set in motion. He ordered his men to take tufts of cotton, soak them in oil, and tie a piece to the tail of every single cat and bird. Then, as dusk settled, he gave the command, "Light them and let them go." What happened next was an act of pure psychological genius. The terrified animals, driven by raw instinct, did exactly what Genghis Khan knew they would. They ran back to the only home they knew. They fled for their nests, their familiar hiding spots, all inside the city walls. Cats with their tails literally on fire, streaked into barns, under wooden porches, and into haylofts. Swallows, now tiny fireballs, flew back to their nests tucked under the eaves of the city's thousands of wooden buildings. Within minutes, hundreds, then thousands of small fires erupted all at once, all across Volahigh. The city was plunged into absolute chaos. There wasn't one big fire to fight, but 1,000 little ones, spreading like a disease from the inside out. The soldiers who were supposed to be defending the walls were now scattered, desperately trying to save their own homes and families from an enemy they couldn't possibly fight. The fire bells rang, but it was useless. The blaze was everywhere. The panic was total. The city's defenses, once so strong, completely crumbled, and as the people of Volahigh battled the inferno, the Mongol warriors, who had been watching and waiting, launched their final assault. They stormed the now undefended walls and took the burning city with shocking ease. The truth behind the legend. It's an incredible story. It feels like a perfect example of Mongol ruthlessness and brilliant strategy. It's a tale so clever and so shocking that it's been told for centuries. But that brings us to the most important question. Is it too incredible? Did Genghis Khan really conquer a city with an army of flaming cats? The answer, according to most modern historians, is almost certainly no. There is no credible contemporary evidence to confirm that this ever happened. The story doesn't show up in the most reliable 13th century sources, like the official Mongol or Chinese records of the campaigns. Even the city itself, Volahigh, isn't a clearly identified place in the historical record of the Mongol sieges. So if it didn't happen, where did this amazing story come from? The tale is a classic example of a migratory legend. The idea of using animals as incendiary weapons isn't unique to Genghis Khan at all. In fact, it's a story that pops up in different cultures across hundreds, even thousands of years. One of the most famous and well-documented versions happened almost 300 years before the Mongols. It's the story of Olga of Kiev. In the 10th century, after a tribe called the Drevlians murdered her husband, Princess Olga of Kiev went on a brutal campaign of revenge. According to the Rus's primary chronicle, she laid siege to their capital, Iskorostan. After a long fight, she offered them peace for a tiny tribute, just 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from each house. When the relieved Drevlians sent the birds, Olga had her soldiers tie smoldering embers to their feet and release them. The birds flew straight back to their nests, and the entire city was engulfed in flames. The parallels are just too obvious to ignore. It seems far more likely that storytellers over the centuries simply took this dramatic legend and pinned it on the most famous conqueror they knew, Genghis Khan. It was a perfect fit for his brutal reputation, the real Mongol playbook of terror. Even if the flaming cats are a myth, the story sticks around for one big reason. It perfectly captures the real Mongol approach to war. The Mongols were the undisputed masters of psychological warfare. Their goal wasn't just to beat an army. It was to completely crush an enemy's will to even try to resist. Fear was their sharpest weapon. Before the Mongol horde even showed up, their reputation arrived first. They sent spies ahead to spread propaganda, exaggerating the size of their armies and the brutality of their conquests. They would tell stories of cities that resisted being wiped off the map, of giant pyramids made of severed heads, and massacres so total that only a few survivors were deliberately left alive to spread the story of terror to the next town. They were also masters of deception on the battlefield. One famous Mongol tactic was the feigned retreat. A group of their cavalry would pretend to be defeated and flee, luring an overconfident enemy out of formation and into a chase. Once the trap was set, the fleeing Mongols would turn around as a larger hidden force emerged to encircle and annihilate the now exposed army. They even used sound to create panic. Mongol arrows were often tipped with special whistling points. The unearthly shriek of tens of thousands of these arrows flying through the air was enough to terrify even the most disciplined soldiers. At night, they'd order each soldier to light multiple fires, making their army look 3 or 4 times bigger than it actually was. So while Genghis Khan probably never tied a flaming rag to a cat, the idea of turning an enemy's own world against them, their homes, their animals, their sense of safety, is pure Mongol strategy. The legend is a metaphor for a deeper truth. When you fought the Mongols, you weren't just fighting men. You were fighting an army of rumors, ghosts, and your own deepest fears. What do you think is the most effective psychological tactic in the history of war? Let us know in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this dive into the truth behind the legends, hit that like button to help us out with the YouTube algorithm, the legacy of a fiery myth. You'd think this wild idea of weaponizing animals would die out, right? Not a chance. In the 16th century, a German artillery master named Franz Helm wrote a detailed manual on siege warfare. In his book, he explicitly described how to capture a cat from an enemy town, attach a lit bag of incendiaries to its back, and let it go. His chilling logic was that the terrified animal would try to hide in a familiar tight space, like a barn full of hay, and set the city on fire from the inside. And it gets even more modern. During World War II, the United States military seriously developed a plan to use bats as weapons. The Bat Bomb project, codenamed Project X-Ray, involved attaching tiny incendiary bombs to thousands of bats. They'd be dropped over Japanese cities, and the bats would naturally go roost in the eaves of the city's countless wooden buildings. A timer would then ignite the explosives, starting thousands of fires at once. The project was tested and actually proved to be effective, though it was ultimately shelved in favor of the atomic bomb. This recurring idea, from Olga of Kiev to Franz Helm to the U.S. military, shows just how powerful the core concept is. It taps into a fundamental horror, turning the ordinary and the innocent into a weapon. In the end, the flaming cat army of Genghis Khan is almost certainly a legend. It's a powerful piece of folklore that got attached to the legacy of a man whose real-life actions were often just as terrifying. The story lasts not because it's historically accurate, but because, in a way, it feels true to the character we know. He may not have lit the match himself, but Genghis Khan created a world where a story like this was not only believable, but almost expected. He mastered the art of winning a war, before the fighting even started, by conquering the minds of his enemies. The flaming cat army wasn't his tactic, but the terror it represents. That was his signature weapon. And that's a truth far more powerful and far more frightening